Well, welcome to the 2022 LPHCA National Forum. And thanks to everyone for attending. And seriously, great numbers. Really good to see you here again. And for the support of the sponsors. So let's mention CMAC, Cordic, iCabby, and Mini Cabot, who have to have the best name of the day, surely. If you know better, let me know. We'd also like to thank the people who've put this together, the event workers, the builders, the suppliers, exhibitors, panellists, the LPHCA team, the volunteers, and of course the staff here at the Emirates Old Trafford and Hilton Garden Hotel. I'm John Curtis. I'm your host today for two panel sessions. I'm going to try and keep this rabble in order. I'm also going to try and give you the opportunity to speak. And when I do that, it would be great if you can keep questions relatively short. And bear in mind that we do have 100 and odd people in the room, many of whom will also want to ask questions. So your best behaviour would be much appreciated, and I'll try and keep this lot in order. First session runs from 11:30 to 12:30, and we'll cover the extreme difficulties for taxis and private hire vehicle industry in getting drivers, because that's tough at the moment. It's now beginning to compromise public safety. Problems partly due to the pandemic, but more and more, it's the direct consequence of too much red tape and bureaucracy, causing massive delays, which ultimately prevents new blood from entering the industry. There are also extreme costs of entering and staying in the industry, alongside the processes necessary to become or even remain as a taxi or private hire vehicle driver. So this morning's session is going to cover some of those difficulties, as well as some of the innovative solutions that there are for eradicating these problems. The afternoon session will cover the Department for Transport's taxi and private hire vehicle best practice guidance consultation, that's easy to say, which is live until the 20th of June. And that's really important because the consultation is your opportunity to have your say about your industry. The two sessions are intrinsically linked, and the LPHCA has worked very hard to overcome the overly bureaucratic and we believe unnecessary requirements that form part of this consultation. Whilst the Department of Transport is here today in numbers, they're not partaking in the panels, as their 99-page document would take weeks to cover. However, they're here to listen to the trade, our special guest panellists, and most importantly, to you. Your voice matters. As with all LPHCA open events, this is being recorded. You'll have noticed the camera. For openness and transparency. It's therefore in the public domain and will be published. This particular event is being videoed by Shoot Business and will subsequently be edited by our social media partner, Curtis Gabriel. Curtis is just such a great name. No? Okay. Anyway, we've got panel sessions. Each of the panellists, this lot, will introduce themselves because they know themselves best. I'll ask them to give details of the subject they'll be talking about, and they will get 3 minutes. That's it. 3 minutes, gentlemen. After 3 minutes, the shepherd's crook comes out, and you'll be dragged off the stage by Leah, if she's here, and she's ferocious. Once all the panellists have spoken, we'll move to the chairman, Steve Wright, who will give a summary of what's been covered, and then we'll do a question and answer session, which will take place. And funnily enough, the questions come from you. So as people are speaking, think about your questions, take notes, make sure that I get to see you. Put your hand in the air when the Q&A session happens so that you can get answers. The LPHCA team will bring microphones to you so that you can tell us who you are, what company you represent, and then to ask your question. At the end of the Q&A session, there'll be a very brief statement on recently asked topics regarding VAT and other matters by Gary Jacobs of EasyTax, the LPHCA expert partner on VAT and all things taxation in the taxi and private hire sector. Gary won't be doing a Q&A session due to legal and other reasons. I've always wanted to say that. Due to legal reasons, this is not possible. However, he is available and will be there all day. And Neil Morley, our industry legal and contract expert partner, will also be available on the Travis Morley stand all day. There is a free lunch, yay! Am I the only one who gets excited about that? Anyway, free lunch, 12:30, which will finish at 2:30. You guys in the private hire industry, 2 hours for lunch. If that gets out, there'll be trouble. But it's not. It's 2 hours for networking. And that's the most important thing that we can bring today, is finding people, talking to people, sharing, doing the best thing by integrating, collaborating, working together and making it better. So, buffet lunch is in the mezzanine area. So out of here, turn left back towards the exhibition where you were. You'll see there's a blue arrow which points you up some stairs, up to the mezzanine area. That's where lunch is. So, time for the first speaker, and our first panellist, Greg Mendoza. Greg.
So, I've been speaking to anybody who'll listen, and that's not many, so thanks for a captive audience, Steve. For years, really, about things that have affected our industry and will be bothering us down the line. So I'm going to start with something that really, I hear John talking about all the outside influences that are affecting us right now. But the first thing I'm going to do is ask us to have a look at ourselves and the things that are within our own capabilities to resolve. And I'll leave it to the other panellists to talk about some other areas. So there's two things in particular about our industry that have worried me for some time. First thing is we developed a customer expectation. They can summon a ride, have a brand new vehicle arrive on their doorstep within minutes, get to their destination and pay, frankly, not much more than they would have paid if they'd have gone on public transport. That's an issue in and of itself. The second thing, which is a bit more controversial maybe, is that the industry has been hooked for more than a decade on a ready source of labour prepared to work long hours, sometimes for lower than average pay and even below average minimum wage, and we've heard some stories about that over the years. And I think both of these factors are unsustainable and we're bound to cause problems for the industry at some point in the future. I've been saying, that the chickens will come home to roost when the economy grows and better paid jobs are available for the private hire driver workforce. And as it happens, I was partially correct. It took a global pandemic mixed potentially with the impact of Brexit, which prompted a large section of our immigrant workforce to return home, while others found alternative employment and found also that they preferred it. So there's a massive driver shortage right now. Some estimate that up to 40% of licensed drivers have left the industry for one reason or another. It's hard to tell exactly, but there are clearly far fewer drivers available to service our business today than there was 3 years ago. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. There would also appear to be thousands of licensed private hire drivers out there that have decided after COVID not to return to us to service an ever-growing demand. And absolutely, there are a number of outside factors at play. And these will be discussed by the panel today and by yourselves. But we also need to be honest and take a good long look at ourselves to see how we can influence this. Private hire driving should be an appealing career. You can work for yourself, unsupervised, flexible hours, get to meet lots of great people. Surely there are many people out there for whom this would be a great career choice. But despite this, they've left in their thousands. In my opinion, a significant equation in this is money. Put quite simply, many drivers have got used to working long and unsociable hours to make ends meet. They have mortgages to pay, families to feed, and with the rising cost of living, this gets harder every day. We can offer them a great job. It's clean, it's safe, there's plenty of work, but we also need to value what we do and charge accordingly. For many years, we've been involved in a race to the bottom. Many operators, particularly the very large and app-based ones who need to grow volume to satisfy investors, have pushed prices down. This hurts us all and makes it harder to properly reward our drivers and ourselves. We've got an opportunity now. The courts, in some ways, have been levelling the playing field, and in many ways we should embrace this, as it makes harder for these operators to use tax dodges and misrepresent the status of their drivers to unfairly keep fares low. Our response needs to be that we charge for the service we deliver. That private hire of a car and licensed driver, it should never be cheaper for 2 or 3 people to go out of an evening, use a private hire vehicle and pay less than the bus fare. There's demand out there, there's reduced capacity, and there are many great businesses ready to service it. And I know many have taken the opportunity to increase fares. I would say be bold and do it, even at the expense of turnover. Customers may leave, but where will they go? And surely the bottom line for you as well as your drivers has got to be far more important than volumes or turnover. Many years ago, an old boss of mine said something that rings true more than ever, that turnover is vanity, profit is sanity. And never before has this made sense. Higher fares will help attract new drivers as well as encourage experienced drivers to return. This is within our control and we should be dealing with this immediately.
Thank you, Greg. Agree with that entirely. Thank you, Greg. Very good. Thank you. Next up, Andy Mahoney. Oh, you've got one. You got your own.
Nope. Oh, it does work. Thank you, Greg. That was really good. Andy Mahoney, 24/7 Group. We specialise in home-to-school transport, mainly for special needs children, the most vulnerable that any of us could take. And the driver situation for us, for the councils, for the kids, for the families, is absolutely crucial. We, as I said, take the most vulnerable and we're letting them down. Our company takes just over 5,500 special needs children to school every day, and we're just one of many companies that do it. We employ our staff and we train our staff, and we work in a regulated industry in respect of taking children at school has now become a regulated industry. And when it comes to special needs children, we have to have specialised training for them. So we're private hire. We go through all of the normal private hire bits, and as you all know, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months to licence a driver, £700-800 worth of costs just doesn't work. Drivers, won't come into the industry or are struggling to come into the industry with them sort of costs. And for ourselves, we have to have exactly the same training as every private hire driver, but then in order to take a special needs child to school, we have to have, would you believe, the same again, another DBS, but for vulnerable children and adults, because the adult workforce doesn't cover taking children to school, would you believe? Can't work that one out, I really can't. And we have to have a separate disability awareness training, which is often done by the same people that done it in the first place for the taxi badge. It's no different for the awareness training, but we have to have a second one. And then, of course, we have to have specialist one-to-one training, because many of our children have got medical needs. They might need suction, have the food delivered via a tube, feeding tube, that sort of thing, come out in the morning in all sorts of states. So with that one-to-one training and everything else, it takes our drivers five months probably to be able to actually apply and get a licence. Licensing authorities have let us, I believe, in the main, have let us all down over COVID. They have let us down. Department of Transport have done what they can, but they've not been listening. The licensing authorities haven't been listening. And we are now at a point where licensing is not safeguarding children. There's hundreds of children that we, as a company, can't take to school every day on time, if at all. Because, like today, we've got 180 drivers off COVID. If you haven't got drivers coming through the system, and we're all the same, whether it's special needs or normal private hire or taxi, we cannot possibly safeguard people. Licensing is about safeguarding. We really do need the authorities, DFT, to understand what special needs children's about, and to really look at the best way that we can safeguard children. We have to safeguard. we have to go through the regime and get everything right. But in order to do it, it doesn't mean to say that what we have to do is apply for a licence before applying for a DBS. And then only after having a DBS with some can you then go for a medical at the medical centre of the council's choice, where a GP or a general practitioner GP has got to do, instead of looking at the patients that they should have to have. When there's companies, medical practitioners companies about like D4U, Drivers for You, that will do it. My plea to the Department of Transport is please look at special needs children. Please look at how we can best protect them, work with the councils, with the county councils, and look at the best way of getting it done, because we're not protecting them. Thank you.
Bless you, Andy. Thank you very much. And I speak as the grandfather of an autistic grandson, and we rely extremely heavily on your skills and of your colleagues, so thank you for that and all you do. Johnny Goldstone, it is your moment, sir. Will it work? Go for it.
Don't know. Hello.
I stand ready.
Good morning. My name's Johnny Goldstone. I'm one of the founders and managing director of Green Tomato Cars. Steve's asked me to talk about apprenticeships for 3 minutes, so it's probably twice as long as anybody wants to hear about them for. But briefly, we all know what the problem is at the big level. Shortage of drivers. Reasons are well documented. Agree with everything that's been said thus far. How we then look at that problem at a more operator-specific level, I think very much depends on the type of operator you are and how you're going to solve those issues in terms of your driver numbers, what packages are going to appeal to what kind of drivers doing what kind of work. I think if you are the type of operator that is looking for loyalty, which clearly is in short demand, and a level of quality that Greg and Andy and many of the rest of you in this room need, and also new drivers, new blood into the industry, then the question, how do you attract all of that? I think there's a few kind of obvious solutions. Paying more and looking at the overall package that you're offering. Companies now offering benefits, various perks, for want of a better word. Streamlining the licensing regime is clearly something that I think we all agree is required. But adding new drivers into this depleted pool, I think is something that we all have to really seriously think about, and what options are there for doing that, and that's where apprenticeships come in. We've been looking at this quite a bit over the last 6 to 12 months with the Department for Education. The requirements for an apprenticeship are that the course and the training that you're going to provide has to be really quite unique and specific. So you almost have to make the course fit that requirement before you go any further. So with private hire, actually how you look after vulnerable passengers is one of the areas that you would focus on. Secure driving, defensive driving, especially in terms of VIP passengers, would be something else. Sustainability, surprise, surprise, is a big box-ticking exercise anywhere to do with government. But also you'd go into the details of vehicle maintenance, engineering, mechanics. Given what I've looked at, you have to offer a 12-month course, and 20% of that course as a minimum has to be off the road or classroom based. Now that might sound off-putting, but I think actually when you look at that in terms of a number of days and hours and how much time you would need to spend on vulnerable passenger transport training, for example, I think you quite quickly fill up that time. There is funding to assist with apprenticeships, and people who are interested, operators who are interested, have a few options in terms of how to be involved. One requirement, the sort of overriding requirement, is that we set up what is called a trailblazer group, so a bit of a committee, if you like, of operators from around the UK who would be interested in being involved in this and getting it up and running. Companies could also operate as trainers and or as operators taking drivers on as apprentices. I think there's quite a lot of concern about what it means to have employee drivers, and I'm not going to go into that now. Suffice to say, I know a lot of people in the room do work with employee drivers. We work with employee drivers. It doesn't work for everybody, but I think it works for enough people, and like Greg says, coming into the industry could be attractive to a lot of people who are currently outside it and who would make excellent drivers. So my ask today is there anyone who thinks that might be interesting? I know I haven't gone into the details, but I'd be very happy to do so. Absolutely no full-on commitment at the moment, but if I could get emails even and set up a conversation and see if we can actually get enough interest to have a go at this, then I think that's one way that we can start to address the shortages that we're facing. So my email is johnny.goldstone@greentomatocars.com. I'm sure most of you have a shorter email than that, but we can get that information to you in due course. Thank you.
Thank you, Johnny. Don't worry about it. Could you pass it to Dave for me? Dave, it is your moment.
Hi, Dave Edwards here from D4 Drivers. I'd like to discuss the current situation with driver medicals. We are the largest provider of DVLA driver medicals in the UK. So we do a lot of work with HGV, bus drivers and also taxi drivers. I don't know if you're aware, but at the start of the pandemic, the BMA wrote to all GPs asking them to suspend all driver medicals until further notice, because they were seen to have to look after people who were ill rather than people who needed a medical. And then in July of 2020, they informed that all HGV drivers, because they were classed as essential drivers, could go and see GPs, but taxi drivers, unfortunately, because they weren't classed as essential, could not. So there are a lot of taxi drivers around trying to find a GP to go and see, and they're being knocked back. So we provide an alternative, but the issue with that is that the good thing is that quite a number of local authorities now are changing their policies. They are, instead of insisting that they go and see their own GP, they are now saying they can go and see any GMC registered doctor. The other issue, apart from that, is the medical records side of things. So some licensing authorities still insist on full medical records, which is time-consuming for the doctors and the staff at the GP practice to perform. Basically, if you don't know the difference, there's full medical records and summary records. A full medical record is everything that's happened to you since you were born, and the summary records are just the highlights. But in October 2020, as an experiment, I asked my GP for my summary of records. I had them in hand in 20 minutes. The receptionist just prints them off and gives them out. But like I said, some local authorities are still insisting that that's happening, and it's causing major problems and major issues. We run over 100 clinics across the whole of the UK, a nationwide network. So depending on which licensing authority you fall under, we can actually see you do the medicals. The GPs aren't actually mandated to do this as part of their NHS contract, so a lot of them that were told not to do it are not picking the work back up again. And if they do, they are charging ridiculous amounts of money, 3, 4, 5 times as what we charge. If you were a HGV driver, and we do a lot of HGV lorries and bus drivers, so if you were a HGV driver driving a 44-tonner down the M6, you can have a medical done by any GMC registered doctor. You don't need any medical records. If you're a bus driver full of 50 or 60 people on your bus, again, it's exactly the same thing. You only have to go and have your medical done by a GMC registered doctor. You don't need to take any medical records. Now, we understand the difference is that the doctors at the DVLA make the decision on a bus driver or a lorry driver whether they are fit to drive, whereas our doctors make the decision of a taxi driver whether they are fit to drive. So we do need to see some form of medical records, but the summary of medical records is easily good enough and covers all the things that our doctors need to know whether that person is actually fit to drive or not. So that's basically it. That's the highlights or highlighted what the issues are. Things are changing. We are getting more councils coming on board, coming to us, asking us for help, because they've got a backlog of drivers who just can't get in to get their medicals sorted.
Brilliant.
Thank
Thank you.
it.
Cheers, Dave. Thank you very much. Right, and finally, we have John Garforth.
Thank you and good morning. I'm John Garforth. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Institute of Licensing, but I'm also by day a licensing manager in a local authority here in Greater Manchester. I just want to talk about some local authority current issues really that affect drivers coming into the trade. And we've heard from other panellists, as I've seen, that there is a decrease in people coming through now. It hasn't bounced back to where it was pre-COVID. Applications have decreased, and driver availability is a concern to many operators who I speak to. You are working in a heavily regulated industry with many variances in policy up and down the country and even within regions. Here in Greater Manchester, we've been doing a piece of work for the last 2 or 3 years, which feels like 20 or 30 years, but it is only 2 or 3 years on what we call minimum licensing standards. And that very much looked at bringing the 10 authorities in Greater Manchester together to look at parity in policy for new and existing drivers. And that's currently being rolled out across Greater Manchester. And that was dovetailed in many respects to our clean air zone, which I know has been controversial, and for those who are keeping an eye on Greater Manchester's clean air zone, that's currently been paused while some reflections on post-COVID are discussed again with government, and some new ideas presented to government in July. Some of the bugbears of mine on driver availability and local regulation is about having local drivers locally licensed working in local areas. And we all know the many hundreds and thousands of drivers who go licence shopping up and down the country to find a licensing authority of their choice where, for various reasons, they can get a licence with not maybe as many policies to comply with, might be cheaper, might be quicker, for various reasons. And that's one reason why I fully support a move towards national standards. And I think that's something I know the DFT are working on to find parliamentary time for, and I'm grateful for that. But we do need that parity, and that's one of the only times we're going to get a situation where we can see common standards and stop some of this moving around the country to try and stop a driver from Newcastle going getting licensed in the Midlands, or then going working in Portsmouth, as we've been hearing recently. But some of the things that locally have been done up and down the country are around how people can easily apply for applications. And a lot of authorities who were still paper-based have gone online during COVID, and that's helped. Some authorities have managed to get grants to help new startups, which has been really good. You've heard about medicals and how that's become a quicker, easier and cheaper process. Thrown into that, so we've had the HMRC conditionality rules brought in last month, and there's the ongoing debacle, I call it, of DBS checks, and not only the hold-ups in that, but the problems with the update service, and how those yearly charges are processed. That all causes stress, anxiety to drivers, and it's things like that that need addressing. And then there's the future. what will licensing continue to look like in the future? We know the government aren't intending to legislate and replace the existing two main statutes that regulate the hackney carriage and private hire industries. But we have had the recent levelling up white paper where we've seen the start of a discussion about reducing the number of licensing authorities that there are around the country. And again, that's a positive, in my view, to move forward to more closely local regulation and working locally with operators to get a better policy for all. Thanks very much.
Brilliant, thank you, John. And it's always good to see somebody who's from a licensing authority step out from behind the desk and come and face a tough crowd, I think it's fair to say, and there may be some questions for you, but it gives me great pleasure to introduce our chairman without a wand that works. Steve Wright, summary for today so far.
Yes, thank you very much, John, and thanks to the panellists. I'll just go along the line and make a comment on each of them quickly. Greg's absolutely right. I stopped being an operator in 1999, and some people are still charging the same rates. It's a nonsense. The prices have to go up, otherwise you're not going to attract drivers. With regards to Andy and the special needs stuff, it's a nonsense that some of the training loops that are needing to go through 2-3 times is a waste of money. It's preventing drivers coming in, drivers being instructed how to turn a meter on or how to give change out of a £10 note when they're working on a fixed route and needing to do a knowledge test. What a nonsense. John at Transport for Greater Manchester, we've been working very closely with them, and we've come up with some very good measures through the consultation. Consultations are always difficult processes, but we're on ongoing work with them, and positive things have been happening. And I know that he's actually taken up the medical stuff, which we'll come on to. Johnny Goldston, absolutely right. We need to get drivers in through any means that we can. Apprenticeships are something that can be considered. So please do either contact myself at the LPHCA or Johnny directly if you can't remember his long email address. And we'll make it available to you so that collectively as a trade, we can actually get some funding for and some incentive to bring some new blood into the sector. Dave at D4 Drivers, very, very interesting. Their medicals are so expensive, they're 55 quid. Yes, I know most of your drivers are paying 150 plus. They also do the eye test. They're also used by buses, HGV drivers, coaches, airline pilots and what have you. And they use medical council practitioners that are approved. That whole process can be improved massively. It'll also help the NHS. So I just wanted to go along the line and make a couple of points. This session not only highlighted problems, it also put forward some solutions, because it's no good being victim elder and saying everything is wrong without actually offering up how you're going to solve the problems. So the LPHCA is going to amplify these problems, but equally we're going to amplify solutions. As well as the subject covered here, just a few of them, we've also got on our plate the impact of the pandemic, serious delays getting licensing, which has been highlighted. It's a nonsense. It's taking 10 months in some places. Completely unnecessary training and testing. I got a National Training Award and Investors in People, so training and testing runs through my DNA, but it's absolutely a nonsense to make people do training and testing when they've already been tested. We've also got the DVLA delays, getting licenses for some drivers, and the DBS farce. It is a farce. There are still problems with it. I was on the original panel in 1998, before the criminal record checks were in place. We said it needs to be slick, it needs to be portable, and people having to do repeat things over and over again, go to one council, if you move, you've got to do another one. This needs to be a joined-up process. And as I think John mentioned, nobody's a bigger fan of national standards than me. The fact that on one side of the road there's one set of standards, on another side of the road it's a nonsense. We also need a workable transition to net zero. We can't get to net zero without the charging infrastructure, without the grant money, without a joined-up plan, without appropriate vehicles. So it's very, very important. All of these things come into the mix that make us have a shortage of drivers. So today we have an opportunity to publicly highlight this. We've got colleagues from the Department for Transport here, we've got colleagues from licensing authorities. Importantly, we've got operators, drivers and representatives here. So please ask the panellists questions, and I'll hand over to John to tell you how that works. Thank you very much, everybody.
Come on, Jack. Give me some. Give me some voice. May I take yours, Steve? I've got a big mouth. Don't worry, I could do it. But I'm not going to. Okay, so Q&A. We are a panel. We're going to answer your questions. So keep it brief if you can. Keep your answers brief if you can. We've got 20 minutes. But before we do that, David, now is your moment. David, you have a plea, a bit of collaboration and support. Talk to us.
It's pretty simple, guys. Ultimately, we're in the same boat as you, all of you, looking for drivers, struggling in some respects, having success in others. We have a huge volume of airport transfers about to hit us in the next couple of months. If any of the companies out there want arrivals to match their departures in and around anywhere, pretty much everywhere in the UK, we're going to have a large volume of them. So just come and tap me on the shoulder and we can have a chat, rates, conditions, etc., and hopefully start working with a load of you.
Brilliant. Cheers, David. Thank you very much indeed. I'm the one without the hair and no jobs. He's the one with the hair and the jobs. Okay, right, Q&A. Who's got a question? Oh, there were two people who rubbed their noses and played with their eyes, pretending. Sir, your name, who you work for, and what your question is, please.
Hi, I'm Gavin Johnston. Got company Emirates Taxis and Aberdeen Taxis. Great points, I agree with them all, and thanks for that. The question I have is, it infuriates me how we're not recognised as a body as such. The pandemic, the storms, drivers risking life and limb. When are we going to get recognised in the transport network? Anyone that can answer it.
Straightforward Aberdeen talking there. You might need this one, Steve. Yeah.
Thank you. Hi. Well, to a degree, we are being slowly recognised as public transport. In recent communications from government, in the 2 years of talks we've had with them on a monthly basis and the weekly talks we've had with other licensing authorities, they have slowly recognised what we are doing. We are a form of public transport. Without us, the NHS, schools, airplanes, buses, coaches, trains, etc., would not run. Without us, people wouldn't get home safely at night. Without us, people wouldn't get to work in the morning. Without us, special needs children couldn't be picked up. So there's a message here that we've been playing. It's a very good point that you make, but we're on the case. Good question.
Brilliant question. Always comes from Scotland. Thank you. I live in Portsmouth. Question coming. Right, okay. Who else has got a question? Lady there first, and the microphone is on its way.
Hello, I'm Laura Collette from LCH. I just had a question in relation to licensing and in relation to basically we provide breakdown service for chauffeurs and private hire drivers throughout the UK. Now, obviously, with the difference in standards throughout the UK, it makes it very difficult from a licensing perspective. Now, I know you said that you're doing some work on nationalising standards or locally, anyway, within the Greater Manchester region. What does this kind of consist of, and what kind of timeframes do you presume that would be completed within?
John, it's got to be one for you, I think.
Looks like it's me, yes. Thank you. Good question. And in Greater Manchester, it's been a piece of work for a number of years. A number of authorities have already started implementing. Others were waiting until after last week's elections to get to the next policy stages on that. A lot of it was around driver, vehicle and operator standards in terms of policy in GM, and we were looking around application criteria, ages of vehicles, emissions for vehicles, things like consistency on how we apply to blacked out windows, which is often to your sector useful to know, because if you're licensing a car or certainly renting a car out to multiple operators, one local authority might take it, one might not. And operator standards, vehicle standards and driver common conditions across all the 10 districts. And that does blend very much into what national standards could look like. And I know we're not unique in Greater Manchester in what we've been doing. Other council areas have been doing that. But I think you'll see more of that, particularly as more authorities combine formally as to create bigger unitary councils across the country. But it shows that it's possible. It shows it's doable. It shows that you do need to engage with the trade, as we've been doing in Greater Manchester. But it also shows the government that on the next level, to bring it to a national standard, it is a doable thing. But it does take a lot of work. And you've got, in councils, in our area, for example, we've got 10 councils to get that through, to get it approved. So it's no easy feat. But the main thing is to start, if in areas where you're based, if you haven't had conversations, start having them about how everyone can work together for a common standard.
Brilliant. Thank you, John. Appreciate that. There was a question here, sir. So I wonder if you could bring a microphone. Whilst we do that, quick straw poll. Who thinks national standards are a good idea? Hand in the air. That's really interesting. And retaining the existing system, who thinks that's a good idea? There we go. Right. Excellent. Thank you very much. Your question, sir.
Yeah, I mean, with regards to national standards, I mean, I know that's... David Lowry, the Director of the National Private Highway and Taxi Association and Safe System CCTV. With regards to national standards, that's something that Steve and I have been working on and campaigning for a long time. And to coin your phrase, Stephen, it's absolute minimum standards, not just national standards. But to come back to, I mean, there's two documents that are running now. One of them is the Department for Transport consultation exercise, and I implore all of you to get involved. Because the amount of times that we say the regulators do not understand what it's like for us on the street, they're asking us to tell them what it's like on the street. And if you don't tell them, they're never going to know. And there's various aspects of that are important to you as operators, to drivers, to vehicles, to all aspects of it. But the question is with regards to the levelling up, as John said. There's a white paper out there now on levelling up, but I'm a bit confused because you said it allows operators to work more locally. The levelling up actually widens the regions and reduces that because you won't be as local, it'll be more regional and a far wider area as opposed to what you've currently got, which is local.
Steve, hand in the air, and as chairman, you go.
Thanks, John. The check's in the post. Just with regard to levelling up, we've already started to see levelling up, and in fact, the LPHCA was the instigator of it by getting London under one authority, because there were people around back in the 90s, dating back to the 70s, that wanted every single London borough to manage it. And if you look at what happens outside London, so we got London under one regulatory authority. That's been painful at times, but it's also had a lot of plus factors to it. More recently, we've seen what John and the Transport for Greater Manchester people are doing, not quite to the same extent as London, but actually joining up the regulations and agreeing on common standards through an area. Even though the boroughs, I believe, is it the 10 authorities, John, are actually semi-autonomous to a degree, but it's a step absolutely in the right direction. I'd have liked to have seen it move towards the London model, but, you know, Manchester voted on it, that's what they're doing. Most recently, I've been working with a number of councils in the Cambridgeshire and Buckinghamshire and various other areas that are going into this joined up licensing regimes, and it's actually working very well. They are bigger, there's one set of standards, it's reducing costs, and it's actually working out to be very, very well. So with regard to levelling up, I'm a fan of it. I think it works far better than having nearly 300 authorities, all making different rules, all doing different things. So I think there's an opportunity both via the government best practice to point out towards national standards how that can be achieved, and to make some comments to the white paper on levelling up, how this can only be a good thing. So the members that I've spoken to that are actually in these councils that are actually joining up, I think they're called unitary councils, is that the right word, unitary? You know, where there's 4 or 5, whereas I think you could say Milton Keynes, Chesham, High Wycombe, Aylesbury, are now under one regime rather than 5 different operating. And it does seem to be working very well. And the LPHCA's policy is to support this. We think it's a good thing because it's making it far easier. One lot of administration, I mean, if a driver moves house, for example, into the next borough, that means going through all the DBS, the nonsense over and over again. You know, it's a step in the right direction, and it's a step towards national standards. So sorry it's a bit of a long-winded answer, Dave, but there you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. John, anything to add to that sort of local to regional move in the levelling up paper?
Like I said, I think the regional model will work. I appreciate Dave's comments on spreading it out wider, but there's lots of best practice out there. There's lots of places where, as Steve just said, it is happening. We've seen the Cumbrian authorities just merge last month from a number of councils down to 2 unitaries. But it does need an awful lot of work, and it needs a rewrite of policy areas. It needs engagement with the trade. It needs conversation over a number of months to get to a position where the trade, the regulators and the politicians who ultimately make these decisions are in a place where it's the best possible policy at that time. So I know there might be some concern both from the trade and from some politicians locally about expanding areas, but I think it is, as Peter Kay says, I think it is the future, and it is about better regulation, and where operators are growing in their geographical areas, they're buying other companies out or joining up with other companies in other areas, there's more and more opportunity for them to get disgruntled and confused by multiple policies, and this is one way of overcoming that.
Brilliant. Thank you, John. We've got time for 2 more questions, and you caught my eye, sir, so we'll get a microphone to you if we can, please. It's on its way, fear not, it's coming. And then we're going to come to you, and you will be our final question. It's coming your way. Not you, the one behind you. Gotcha. Thank you.
So, this works. My name's Barry Ingram. I come from Colchester in Essex. A new man on the block, really. Small start-up, passenger on board. Not an advert, but basically it's a cheap app that's available for anyone to use as a business. I've got experience as a driver, experience as an operator. We now rent 8 cars out in Essex to all the operators are in and around. So therefore, I've changed, if you like. Let's cut the chase here. I've got my prime experience and my profession is as an accountant. And in accountancy industry, I run a practice. We're turning to what you all would have probably heard is MTD. Making tax digital.
Can we get to the question, please?
Making taxi digital would really be interesting. I'm wondering if our council representative there, sorry if I download you there by saying council, but your regulatory authority. I think personally that everybody should be more digital, even if they're running a one-man band. I mean, let's audit this stuff and work out where the regulation's coming from. We've got enough regulation, I know, but it's very easy then to run a system and a business properly, and let's face it, the public want to see us working together. The other question was, to jump quickly there, totally different topic.
Sorry, one question please, because there's 150 people in
What age is an apprenticeship?
That was
they meant to start at 27.
Perfect.
I thought that was a quick one, but they both need answers.
Let's go for Johnny. Johnny, apprenticeships.
Last time I checked, it was around 25. Obviously, you're going to have questions around the licensing and how long the drivers held their licence. But I don't think it's going to count too many people out.
Okay, thank you. And Steve?
Can we just to get Tom, who's been a great help to us
Tom.
in the Manchester area, with a last question, please,
Yeah, my
Tom.
friend, I've got one for you, I promised.
And then we'll go into the next bit. Thank you.
I think a lot of this all depends on what's causing all this interference about what's causing the problems around the private hire trade. A lot's come from the 2015 Deregulation Act. Do we seriously still want the Deregulation Act in place? Or should we be concentrating on getting rid of it? Because I'm sure everybody, I know I feel as though it's a lot better before the Deregulation Act. We've worked at lowering licence fees before. All this enforcement on out of town, it must be costing the local trade money. So I'd like to see this Deregulation Act, and I'm sure there's many officers as well, but I'd like to see this Deregulation Act be defunct. Let's get rid of it. Just like to ask everybody's opinion on that.
Thank you, Tom. Steve will have an opinion.
Well, as I was instrumental getting it in, and we never had it in London in the first place, and it was done for safety reasons. On this particular one, Tom, I'm not going to be agreeing with you. I don't know what anybody else thinks, but the ability to subcontract, I pointed out to the minister in London when it was in, that I had a car back in the day with two-way radios, 100 cars. If one of them broke down 50 miles from our office, wasn't it absolutely stupid that outside of London, as a licensed operator, I couldn't ring another company? That's what the Deregulation Act enabled. And it actually, yes, you could say it's caused problems, but actually it's helped trade, and in the subcontracting works very well. My business did subcontracting for 30 years prior to licensing, and it continued to do subcontracting afterwards. The Deregulation Act itself, there's really two sections in it. One of them will increase the licensing duration length, and the other one actually gave the ability for a licensed operator to pass a booking to another operator. Now, what's happening, just with regard to all this cross-border nonsense, the reason many people book out of the area is because they cannot get their vehicles licensed in their own area. 10 months, and they cannot get drivers. So there's a reason for everything. It's not what we really wanted to talk about today, cross-border. We're more interested in dealing with the driver shortages. But there is a reason for everything, and I think it's another debate for another day, cross-border, getting rid of regulation and what have you, the Deregulation Act. The Deregulation Act is primary legislation. We supported the amendments in it, and it's worked very well for many of the LPHCA members. So there would need to be a policy change from the association, because I'm only the voice of the association, for that to happen. So I think that answers that. If I may pass you back to John.
Thank you, Steve. And Tom, there's 2 hours for lunch, so don't miss the opportunity. One final question.
So my name's Will Vanderlinde. I'm here actually representing Red Route, but I'm also an operator from across the pond. And sorry, I'm a little nervous. So we've actually been, our fleets, I own 11 fleets in the state of Virginia, across 11 different jurisdictions with similar problems. When some ride-hailing entrants came to our market, we started doing non-emergency medical transportation. You may have heard of it. It's probably about 80% of all work that we provide in the in Virginia and throughout the jurisdictions that we work. The 21,000 NEMT providers throughout the United States have come together to make a non-emergency medical transportation accreditation commission, which sets the national standards for non-emergency medical transport. Through that, we've worked with ANSI, which is the American National Standards Institute, to be able to work towards making these national standards. And with that as well, we've worked on a credentialing exchange platform. So all of these things I suggest you guys exploring within at your national level to implement as well. And it's nemtac.org, great resource. We put a lot of work into it, and I highly suggest you check it out.
Thank you, Will. Appreciate that. Good stuff. Interesting, good bit of collaboration and international links, so thank you for that. Right, Gary Jacobs. Gary, where are you, dear chap? Gary! Hello, Gary. Right, so Gary's going to talk to us from Easy Tax just about some recent court proceedings. There will be no questions.
There will be no questions. So, my name's Gary Jacobs. I know half the room, no, three-quarters of the room anyway. Hi. Steve has basically just asked me to stand up here, and there won't be any questions, but as you know, I'm here exhibiting, we're rolling out our conditionality stuff for operators, got to get a mention in. But what Steve's asked me to do is just have a very brief talk about some of the issues that my phone has been ringing off the hook, and it's about something that is not the forum to be spoken about here. So I've just written down here, and it's to do with the legislation. Remember, I'm the accountant, I'm not the legal guy, about the Uber versus TfL versus UTAG versus ADCU versus Freenel. This is not about the legality or what's come from there, but there has been a side issue. And just to give you an example, I've written here a few of the questions. People have been phoning me and asking me about what the judgment was actually supposed to do. Was it about contractual relationships, employment relationships, or tax year? What's the relevance to indirect tax and VAT? And that's the thing that's been coming through an awful lot. There's been a great deal of talk. We've got the Sefton local authority case coming up to look to take it past TfL and London. And once again, I'm not here to talk about the results and legality of it. But I want to make a very brief statement about VAT. A lot of operators are very worried that they now have to put VAT on their fares. This is my opinion and my opinion only, and I'm going to be here for the rest of the day, and I'm sure a lot of you are going to have a lot to say about it. But as we stand at the moment, the right to dictate who charges VAT stands in the hands of the government and the HMRC. It doesn't stand in the hands of regulation authorities. So what it means is, at the moment, as far as we're concerned, and from the view of the LPHCA in discussions with Steve, nothing has actually changed. There's an awful lot of talk about it. There's an awful lot of talk about whether or not the word principle, what it meant, and anybody that's looked into us has seen it. But as we stand at the moment, there is no significant change, and we're not saying that it isn't going to change in the future, but as we stand, there is a great deal of fear about VAT on fares. Anybody that is currently acting as principal, i.e. a chauffeur style, by job, would already be principal in the terms of charging VAT. But we're talking about those people on what I would call the traditional minicab model. We're not going to go into it too detail. But at the moment, as it stands, there is a huge fear, and people were phoning up and asking. The position that we're taking is nothing is changing at the moment. We're not going to answer questions because I'm sure there's going to be, but I would encourage anybody that we're more than happy to talk to on my stand towards the end of the day. We just wanted to make a mention of it because so many people have been asking about it, and I know that it's a great fear, but there's some really, really important issues being spoken about here. There's a lot going on in the trade, and it's something that we are aware of, but is not as we stand at the moment. And I'm sure any of the ride-hailing apps, if they're actually in the room, might have a different view. But this is where we stand on it for operators at the moment. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. And just to mention another side issue that's bubbling quite alongside Gary's work is the law of contracts and things with your drivers. And we have Neil Morley from Travis Morley and Gary from Easy Tax. Both have stands today, and both will be delighted to talk to you about this in the 2-hour lunch break that John's just going to tell us about.
Right, before we go to lunch, we were told 12:30, it's 12:32. Good effort, well done. See if we can do better this afternoon. Thank you very much to the two people who are helping with microphones. Really, really appreciate that. And the sound guys, bless you. This panel, superb depth of knowledge. So thank you all. Round of applause for the panel, if you would.